So why don't you go ahead and start us out, Jonah?
Well, I just wanted to talk about some odd experiences that have happened, over the course of the last 10 years or so. And it involves, I suppose you could say, the supernatural. I have no real scientific verification of any of this, as it's just an experience and you don't really know, what caused it, or was it a dream or whatever. So we lived in this house, Dolores and I. It's the house that we lived in, well, before we got married and when we got married. And when we had kids, our oldest child was about less than 2, but he would have these terrible night terrors, just inconsolable at night. And it was night after night and just inconsolable night terrors. And we were talking about it, and I don't know if she said it or I thought about it, but I was like, well, I'll just try blessing the house with holy water at night. And so at night, I would walk around the house and bless it and say the St. Michael prayer. And that ended up being, it was definitely more than 90% effective, to the range of 99% effective. It wasn't like the night terrors never happened again, but they were greatly reduced. And if I got out of the habit of doing that, that was when it would start up again. And so that was kind of odd. And then my son got to be a little bit older, and this is in the same house still. And it got to the point where we'd be praying at night, before he went to bed, and he could talk. And we'd ask him what he wanted to pray for. And he would always say, I pray that Dad doesn't get his legs broken, which is nice. That has never happened yet. And and
Knock on wood.
and then he would also say he'd pray for the people around the room. And we ignored it for a while, like we didn't know what he was talking about. But then he just was persistent about it, the people, and we would say, what people? And he would start pointing around the room to the people around us. And we couldn't see them, and it was just odd, and so then we moved and moved into a different house, a rental house, while we built a new house. And nothing strange happened in that house, except for when I would wake up at night, I would just feel like people were watching me all around me. And it was just a bizarre feeling, but I'd never thought much of it, other than it's just a dream or whatever. But then we moved into our new house. And so when we built our new house, we put blessed medals of various types, including Saint Benedict and blessed scapulars, as well as divine mercy images, like the little paper variety that look like bookmarks. We put those into our foundation in the different corners and different walls of the house. And from nearly the very first night we moved in, I had these dreams that were just persistent about how there were entities. I just assumed men, but I don't know, just that they were angry they couldn't get into our house. And it was persistent for nearly 2 years. I can't say every night, but definitely weekly to more than once a week. And it was just relentless. Like I would wake up like sleepwalking, looking out the windows, looking for these things. And they just kept getting angrier and angrier. And it was to the point where it was just bizarre. Like I could almost hear them more clearly. I don't know. I got to the point where I was watching YouTube, and a video of an exorcist, Father Chad Ripperger. He was talking about something, and I can't remember what exactly he said, but it just kind of clicked. And so I said some binding prayers, like basically for the protection of our house and our property, before I went to bed one night. And they've never happened since, which is pretty mind blowing. And, you don't know, it could just be a dream. And maybe, I don't know. But those are all odd situations that has happened in the last 10 years of our lives. And it was both situations were affected by prayer and sacramentals, I guess. And it just makes you wonder, like it just makes you think.
Well, I think for Catholics, our relationships with
quote unquote paranormal is an interesting one. I mean, I would say that on the one hand, we have sort of the architecture for that stuff as much as anyone, in terms of our belief of heaven and hell and angels and demons and purgatory and souls that are not in heaven, limbo. We talked about limbo last week. So I think to that extent, there are certainly some potential explanations, whether it's demons or souls that are sort of in this, I don't know what state they're in, if it's purgatory. I don't know if you can get out of purgatory and go haunt people on earth.
I don't know if purgatory is on earth and maybe you're locked into this location and you're just crying out for help. I don't know.
Well, I mean, certainly the saints talk about having been visited by people from purgatory or having witnessed hell. So maybe that's a possibility. Maybe they are reaching out. I know a story that I've been told. I don't remember this personally, but when I was under 5, so I was, toddler or whatever, we lived on an old farmhouse down in Iowa. Old farmhouse, 100 years old or whatever, kind of creepy, kind of scary, especially as a kid going in the upstairs. And my aunt, so one of my dad's younger sisters, who was not necessarily a ton older than me, high school or whatever, would come out and babysit us sometimes, and she would spend the night. And apparently it came out years later. She didn't say anything at the time, but she claimed that she would sleep upstairs. No one ever went upstairs except when she stayed over. And she claimed that she'd wake up in the middle of the night or in the morning and there'd be a family of people standing next to her, and she didn't feel threatened by it, but she swears it was real. There was supposedly a family killed in a car accident near the farm years earlier. Who knows if it's
like, could those people be reaching out for prayers in purgatory? Like, is that, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know, can they how are we to know that's what they're, I mean, maybe us as Catholics who understand purgatory or believe in it, maybe that should be, if those things happen, we should take that as an opportunity to pray for them if they are souls, if they're souls of purgatory or souls that are can benefit for some prayers.
Along those same lines, friend of ours, they had some issues in their house. So they lived in an old farmhouse, and there was all kinds of stuff that happened there as far as lights would turn on and off, and doors would open and close. Nothing much more than that, though. But it was odd, and they just got kind of used to it or whatever. But then they built a house, and things started happening there, and they even saw a male figure outside of their house, and both their daughter, who was fairly young, and the husband saw this being, and it alarmed them very much, and to the point where they had a priest come and do some kind of, what is it called, for an exorcism for a house, basically. I think there's a specific term for it, but and that resolved it as well. And it just makes you wonder. I mean, I'm skeptical of things when they don't happen to me, I guess, or I think that's a fair way to look at things.
Yeah, I think there's a lot about this that you question yourself, is this some piece of the God matrix that we don't necessarily understand yet? Should we pray for these things? Should we be praying for ourselves? Should we be sprinkling holy water all over?
I do it every night. Well, okay, I shouldn't say every night, but I do it most nights.
Okay, that's something that we don't do. I know that when we built our house, afterwards I had a friend of mine who was a priest come out, and we blessed like the corners of the property, so to speak. I don't think we walked the whole property line, but yeah,
it's something to consider.
Well, it's certainly, I think it's something that was very common back in historical days, even like the Epiphany, where you'd go out and you'd do the chalk blessing over your doorway, and I think that it was much more, blessed salts and stuff like that, that I don't think are really all that common now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was much more common for people. People would have holy water fonts at their doorways in the house. I don't know if you
Mhm.
had those growing up, but
We did, and we don't now. We should though. It's not a bad thing for sure.
I'll do it when I don't have toddlers. That will be
Hanging on it or ripping it off the wall.
sticking crayons in it and stuff.
Yeah.
But,
No, that's true.
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's funny. There's a guy I reached out to today. I met him through this podcasting group I'm on. He has a podcast, and as I understand his journey, he's a former Catholic who he's older than us, but I kind of a lifelong Catholic, and then in the last 5 years or so, kind of started questioning all that, and based on what I can gather from his podcast, it's not like he's an atheist or anything anymore. He's more of a there's a spiritual universe, and there's reincarnation. So he's very much open to the idea that there is something divine or spiritual outside of ourselves. He just doesn't necessarily seem to think that falls under the Catholic structure, so to speak. And he talks a lot about this stuff, and I'm curious. I'm fascinated how people. I can only consider this stuff through the lens of a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
But
And if I, lived like that, I would be concerned about not having sacramentals, I guess, or access to confession as far as keeping yourself spiritually strong. So I wonder how he reconciles that.
I don't know. I sent him a message. I invited him on the show, so we'll see. We'll get
All
him on the
right.
show and we'll ask him those questions. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is he has been interviewing some of his friends who are the ones that I've heard so far are like lifelong non-Catholic Christians, like a Baptist or something like that. And he's very polite and respectful. He asks some hard questions. He asks them, what do you do about hell, judgment, things like that. When I hear non-Catholics being posed with some of these difficult questions that I wrestle with as a Catholic, I will say, as difficult as some of this stuff is to process and believe, sometimes it makes more sense than the alternatives I've seen so far.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an odd thing to talk about, because if people tell me stories like that, I mean, it depends on who they are. You take it somewhat seriously, but because it's not something I really talk about a lot, but it's interesting to talk about, and I'm interested to hear stories from others. But it's just something that's hard to believe or hard to know how to assess it, really.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I sometimes struggle with as a recovering traditionalist is
You say that every week.
I do. I'm going to trademark that if it hasn't already been taken. At times, some of that stuff feels a little superstitious to me. Some of the blessings and the medals and all that. I'm not.
And that's where we should get an exorcist down here, because I mean, they're in the front lines. They deal, and I think that would, would provide interesting insight into just how efficacious blessings are and what they see in their line of work.
I think we're going to be a target for the demons then. I don't want them guys invading us and
well,
infecting us.
they're on a lot of podcasts.
Well, if there's any exorcists out there, I haven't not seen any of our followers so far that are exorcists, but if you know someone that'll come on, let's get them on the show and hear what they have to say. Maybe they can make some sense of this for us.
Yeah.
So, anything else, Jonah?
No, I think that's it.
All right.
Just just pray and stay close to God.
That's good advice, always. Till next time, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good one.